When you are engaged to another
No.
woman, there is no such thing as closure sex. You ho demon.
Hi, I'm Chansey.
And I'm Lila.
And this is for Criming Out Loud.
Happy after Halloween. Halloween is now over. We have moved past the Hallows Eve, the Halloween. We got a sad 2 trick-or-treaters, and it was snowing here.
It was snowing?
Yeah, we got like 3 inches of snow that night. So
oh my goodness. And you only got 3 trick-or-treaters.
Yeah.
Wow.
2 trick-or-treaters.
Oh, 2.
Yeah. So I hope other people had more success in the trick-or-treating Halloween department, because it was literally like, we looked outside, it could have been Christmas. It was like, this is the wrong time. It's October. Still
it's the
October
wrong
today.
moment.
So
no, that's crazy. I was expecting to get some trick-or-treaters because there's a lot of kids in my apartment complex. And I even bought a little bag of Twix ghoulish candies where the cookie is green instead of brown.
Oh, I actually have never seen those.
Yeah, I was like, just in case we get some trick-or-treaters, I want to give them some green ghoul candy. Nobody showed up. Just me hoping that they'd come, and they didn't. Maybe there's a I don't know. I haven't lived here long enough. Maybe there's an apartment wide you can't trick or treat here thing, because that could totally be a thing.
Yeah, maybe. But I don't know. I've never lived in an apartment.
That's just a killjoy. So
except in college, and nobody trick or treats to college apartments. So
no, only really weird people would do that. If they wanted some like super old purse candy or something. You know?
Like, it's just risky. You don't know what you're gonna get.
Yeah, they might just
treat college apartments. So
start handing out like tequila shots or something. That just doesn't seem safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyways, exciting. I hope everybody had a great Halloween.
Yeah. By way of our small chat fun corner.
I can't believe I said that. Let's not ever.
It might stick now, so you might be stuck with
fun corner. Oh, gosh.
They're on October 22nd, the oldest person in North America died. And there is now a new oldest person in North America.
That seems like an oxymoron.
A new oldest person, yeah. Exactly. And it's Naomi Whitehead, and she's 114.
What?
Yeah.
Every time I hear that people live that long, I'm just like, I'm in awe. 114?
Yeah.
That's too many years. I don't want to live that long.
I know. Well, and it's sad because it's like she actually has outlived her 3 sons. So like all of her children died before her, which like makes sense, because if you think about it, I'm like, they could have been in their 80s.
Yeah.
Or 90s.
They probably were.
Like, and then she's still would have been. So
she had kids when she was 18. I feel like a lot of ladies did that 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she could have.
Yeah, she was born in 1910.
Easily. That's wild. That's before anything happened in the whole history of the America.
That's like basically the 1800s, like quite literally. That blows my mind.
That's wild. That was before. That was like right in the middle of like World War I and the Depression and the Dust Bowl, and she lived through all of that. How is she still alive?
She's here like on an iPad,
2024,
sitting there. And that's wild. Anyway, and she's apparently like, she's only a couple years behind. Like, the oldest woman alive or person alive is also a woman. For some reason, it's always women. They live longer than men. I don't know. Science can't explain that, but that's a thing. And she's like 116. I don't remember where she was from. She was from somewhere in Asia.
Yeah, I feel like I saw an article about her a while ago.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
So they're both very old, and I just was very impressed with that. And like in this interview, she was just like, I'll live as long as the Lord lets me. That's what she said. She's like, I'm just here. She's like, I just enjoy life. And they're like, why do you think you've lived so long? And she's like, well, I do things like cooking and baking and drawing and listening to music, and that's made me have a long life. I'm like, I do all of those things, and I guarantee I'm not making
I'm
it
not
to
gonna, I'm not gonna
114
live
years old.
forever. It's
So,
not gonna.
well, it's what's
Oh
wild is
goodness.
like these people when they're like this old, they're not like in a bed. Like this woman in the picture, she's like in a wheelchair. She's like still somewhat like mobile. It's not like
She's
she's like
moving around.
bedridden in a coma and they're like, yeah, she's 114 years old.
No,
She's
she's
like
like
lucid. It's
really
wild.
alive.
Yeah. Anyway.
That's pretty cool. Congratulations to Naomi Whitehead for being so old and
Yep.
wonderful.
Yep. Exactly.
Crazy. Well, there is really no good segue from that into what what my case is about because there's no old people in my case. So I'm just gonna
Well,
slide on over. Slide on over.
transition.
Yep, I do have a story for you today. It's kind of a crazy one. There's love triangles and DNA saving the day and the
Oh, duh.
LAPD
Of
being the
course.
LAPD.
Okay.
So it's a good one. Strap
Okay, I'm
in.
ready.
So there's three main players in today's story because, you know, I said love triangle. So we've
Okay.
got John Ruetten. I think that's how you say it. I'm not going to lie, I
John.
didn't look it up. Stephanie Lazarus. If you're a Ruetten and it's not Ruetten, then I'm sorry. Okay. So we've got John Ruetten, Stephanie Lazarus, and Sherri Rasmussen. So obviously John is the
Okay.
center of this love triangle.
What was the second name? Because I suck at this.
Stephanie Lazarus.
Okay.
It's kind of a
I
cool name.
heard the last name and somehow missed the first name. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We're
Yep.
good.
So there we got John, Stephanie, and Sherri.
Why did I assume that a love triangle meant two men?
I
I
don't know.
just like when I hear love triangle, I always assume that is one woman and
Well,
two
it's
men.
because we
But
all grew up reading Twilight in our generation.
yeah,
And
that's
that's what
true.
the epitome of a love
That
triangle was in
that
our
garbage.
minds. Bella Swan with Jacob and Edward fighting for her affections.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
what a
that's
love
fair.
triangle is.
Okay.
All right. That's not how this love triangle worked. So, just to set the stage, we're in California, like I said, Los Angeles. John Ruetten, he was doing his undergrad at UCLA. He was studying mechanical engineering when he met Stephanie Lazarus. So
Okay.
they met. She was going to UCLA as well. She was studying political science, and they just kind of had a little bit of a thing. According to John, it wasn't very serious. She was never his girlfriend. He was just more, quote, necking and fooling around, end quote.
Necking.
So,
What year was
necking.
this?
It's in the 70s that this is happening.
Oh, okay.
70s, early 80s. So, necking.
Necking. Got it.
Yep. And for John, it was just good fun. Stephanie and him would occasionally get together, have a good time, you know, casual college thing. Stephanie, she would occasionally like steal John's clothes while he was showering and like take photographs of him while he was in his underwear asleep. Totally normal stuff, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Everybody does that.
Yeah.
Not weird
I
at
would say
all.
so.
Just kidding. That's super weird. Do not take nude pictures of people while they're asleep, please, ever.
Yeah.
So
Especially
weird.
if you're not actually dating.
No. No. But we'll find that John's belief about their relationship was a little bit different than Stephanie's. So, just like the typical, I don't know. This is when I think of a typical college relationship, it's like the ones from the movies, you know, like the frat guys that are like, yeah, I'll let her think she's my girlfriend so that I can get what I want from her.
Yeah. Yeah.
sort
No,
of
I get
thing.
you.
That's the
Yep.
vibe I get about their relationship.
Okay. So
So
he's kind of a
Stephanie
D-bag.
was, oh yeah.
A little douche canoe.
Hopefully he doesn't sue me for saying that, but yeah. Stephanie was under a lot of misconceptions when it came to the labels and definitions of their relationship.
Okay.
But I just want to put out there again that it is not normal to take pictures of people while they're sleeping, no matter what kind of relationship you think you have with them. I just think
Yeah.
that's weird.
I mean, if you're like married and you're, whatever, settled into a life and
That's different,
that's your
but
thing, then that's one thing, but I don't know.
weird. Weird
It's
stuff.
a little creepy. Okay.
Yeah. So this little whatever it was between them, it continued until they graduated. John graduated UCLA and he took a position with Micropolis. That was a company. I don't know what it did, and I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Okay.
But it was something to do with engineering. And Stephanie, she was accepted into the police academy and became an LAPD police officer.
Oh,
So
wow.
they kind of both started their careers. They both got ambitions. They were still seeing each other like on and off, and like still sleeping together. But it was still, to John, not anything serious, and it was very casual. Over the next 3 years, John and Stephanie would get together, have fun, and then kind of go their separate ways. And no big deal. Whatever. Well, in typical man fashion, John's view of their years-long, no strings attached arrangement wasn't quite what Stephanie thought it was. So Stephanie thought she was very special to John. They'd been going out for years and years. She thought they were in a relationship. Truly.
Okay. I will say this, though. I don't know the frequency of these get-togethers.
I actually do because of what happens later, but
Are they
that's
frequent?
just gross. According to John, I feel like this is indelicate, but I'm just gonna say it anyways. He had to testify about it in court. They had sex probably 30 times in the 3 years after graduation. So it was like 10 times a year.
So it's like once a month.
Yeah,
A little bit less.
less than once a month.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I'm like trying to put myself in those shoes and I'm like trying to imagine if I like hooked up with somebody once a month for 3 years. You'd have to feel like there was something going on, but
Well,
also
yeah.
it's enough that you're like we're not dating though. You know what I mean? And especially if it's all it is sex.
Yeah, but I also don't know if it was just sex. Like there wasn't a lot on that. I don't know what
Okay.
he was saying to her or how much time they were spending with each other outside of these, or like 20 or 30 times. Like I don't know if he was
Okay.
taking her on dates and then having sex with her. Like I have no idea. But for some reason, somewhere in there, in her mind, they were together in some way. So
Still is a little weird.
I think it's weird too, unless he was straight up telling her like, I'm gonna marry you.
Yeah. Like I'm in love with you. Like when you're like dating somebody, you spend like a lot of time together. It's not like once every 2 weeks.
I know.
You're like, "Hey, I'm
What's up?
not busy tonight. Let's
Yeah,
get
like
together
you'd
again."
think
I
that
don't know.
anybody in that situation would be like, I'm a booty call. I'm not in a relationship with this person. But Stephanie didn't really get that.
Okay.
And what she also didn't get was that John was actually dating other people. And not only was he dating, but in the year 1985, he started seriously dating a woman named Sherri Rasmussen. There's
So
our
he
third
was
character.
seriously dating Sherri and cheating on her with Stephanie.
Yes, he
Ooh,
was.
what a good man. Real solid.
Seems like a really good guy. Not trying to be like that because he's still in the story, but it's just not the greatest decision making.
No, I'm sorry. There's no excuses for cheating. No.
Yeah, no, there really isn't. There really, really isn't. And Sherri was a really cool lady. She was like really smart. She graduated Loma Linda University, which I have no idea what that is, but
It's really
it sounds
fancy,
really
though.
cool.
Yeah.
And she took the fast track to become a critical care nurse.
Oh,
which
wow.
was really cool in and of itself. But what's cooler is that she'd actually gotten into college when she was 16 years old.
Whoa.
Super smart. And by her late
Cool.
20s, she was the director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center. So she was
Gee.
like running a hospital, basically. And she was teaching classes and presenting things for her fellow nurses. Like, she was really smart. She had her life together.
She's a go-getter. Yeah. She's a
Yeah.
catch. And
So
John decided that wasn't enough for him, the little hoe bag.
really did. Yep, she was a very accomplished lady and most definitely too good for John. Stephanie didn't know about Sherri and John, obviously, because if John's trying to have a little side thing with her, he's not going to just say he's straight up dating somebody. And in a truly humiliating turn of events for Stephanie, she tried to organize a surprise birthday party for John for his birthday in 1985, and she quickly found out that John was not single while she was planning this party. And she was devastated.
Eek.
So
I have such an ick factor going on right now. That is mortifying.
that is
That
horrible.
is truly the worst thing I've
Like, you're
ever
calling
heard.
all his friends and family, and they're like, why are you? Like, that is truly so bad. So
Yeah. Ugh. Okay.
bad. So we've said it, and I'm gonna say it again. But seriously, John, get your ish together. Like, come on. Okay.
Well, and is that not enough? Like, I would have broken up with him at this point. Like, does she?
Well,
Please
that's
tell
what
me she breaks
happens.
up with him. Okay, good. Because I was
Technically.
like,
She finds out he's involved with Sherri and she's heartbroken, and she writes a letter to John's mom, which I thought was really weird, but it also makes me feel like she might have been, if she knew his mother well enough to write a letter to her, I feel
then
like
had
she
she
may
met the
have been
family?
justified about what she thought about their relationship, because it seems like
Yeah.
she had met his mom, because she
Hmm.
writes John's mom a letter. And in the
Okay.
letter, she writes, I'm truly in love with John, and the past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision. So, like, she's talking to John's mom about their relationship, which makes me think that they're acquainted at the very least.
I mean, I have to believe that. I mean, why else would you write somebody?
Unless you're a crazy person, and that happens. So, I don't know how this letter was received. She does seem a little crazy. And she does seem a little crazier in a minute. So
I have a feeling where this is going.
yeah. So and a little while after she sent that letter in her journal, she wrote, quote, I really don't feel like working. I found out that John is getting married, end quote.
Oh, so
at
not
the end of
only like they're engaged.
they got engaged right
And
after
Sherri stays with
this whole
him.
thing.
Sherri's like, no,
Yes.
that's cool that you had a babe on the side.
I don't think she really knew. She suspected,
How?
and we'll get into it. I don't know what John told her about Stephanie.
Oh, maybe he
That's all I
spun
can
lies.
say.
Like, yeah,
I don't know.
she's a crazy biatch over there.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. So Stephanie was super depressed. John was getting married. He was engaged to this other woman. John and Sherri, they were in a committed, future-facing relationship. But that didn't really matter to Stephanie because she wanted John. And apparently it didn't matter all that much to John either, because Stephanie found out where John lived and she went to visit him at his condo. And instead of
What?
turning her away and being like, this is a bad idea, you can't be here, I'm engaged to another woman, John let her in and they had, quote, closure sex. And then he
Not
sent
a
her on her
thing,
way.
folks. Not a thing. When you are engaged to another
No.
woman, there is no such thing as closure sex.
There indeed is not.
You hoe
That's
demon.
not closure. He's the worst. Like, truly the worst. So, according to John, this only happened one time while he was engaged to Sherri. But once was enough for Stephanie to believe that John still wanted her and that she could still be with him.
Was Stephanie just like gorgeous? Just like you just could not pass her by?
I'm not qualified to to say whether someone is beautiful or not, but I would say she's just pretty average.
I'm sorry, I'm not being mean to her, but based on like where this is going, I don't feel that mean saying this. She's not worth cheating on somebody with. But I don't know, maybe she's just good between the sheets.
Maybe she was. Or maybe he was just a real dog. So I guess we'll never know. For whatever reason, John's inability to define their relationship, or not inability, but he didn't want to. I think he liked stringing her along a little bit. It made her believe that there was a possibility for a future with them, and it made her bold. And so, after their little rendezvous, Stephanie brought her skis over to the townhome where John and Sherri were living. And she just asked John, while Sherri was there, to wax her skis for her. And she came over dressed in tight workout clothes and was trying to kind of, be flirty with him. And Sherri was standing right there.
Oh my goodness.
And
Have some dignity.
yeah, literally. And we can all imagine like what this scene looks like. I feel like we've seen it in enough movies to understand. Like Sherri
Yeah.
was home and she was like, "What is this snitch doing in my house right now, John? What is happening?" And John was just standing there. And I feel like John, Sherri immediately was like, "No, you're not gonna wax this woman's skis. That's not happening."
You weirdo, stop it.
She was like, "I'm uncomfortable with that. I really feel like Stephanie shouldn't be asking that, so you should say no." And despite Sherri asking John, "Please, please, please tell her that she can't just drop by and ask for her skis to get waxed." I feel like that is some sort of innuendo somehow.
Yeah,
I
I
don't know
know. I'm like, that's not as straight up as
Whatever.
it appears.
No. John didn't say no to Stephanie, to her weird, frankly inappropriate request. John didn't seem to be able to say no. And I don't know if that was, maybe he was afraid that if he said no, Stephanie would tell Sherri that they'd slept together while they were engaged. I don't know. Maybe he just couldn't say no to Stephanie. I have no idea. But whatever the reason, he waxed Stephanie's skis.
Yeah, that definitely
So,
sounds like something dirty. So,
right?
are we sure that's what we're talking about?
I don't know. I think so. But a couple days later, Stephanie came back by the townhome to pick up her newly waxed skis. And John wasn't home this time. It was just Sherri. And this time, Stephanie didn't come out in super tight workout clothes. She came fully dressed in her police uniform, and she was very armed. So something about that second visit that she got from Stephanie seemed to disturb Sherri, and she ended up begging John to tell Stephanie that she needed to stop coming around. And she point blank asked him, "Is there something going on? Are you still seeing her?" And John said, "No. There wasn't anything going on with Stephanie, and that Sherri should just ignore her. She'll go away.
Oh,
It's fine."
liar. Cheating
Oh
bastard of
my
a
gosh.
liar.
Cheating bastard of a liar is true. Unfortunately, Stephanie was hard to ignore because she just kept popping into Sherri's world, announcing her presence. For instance, while Sherri was working one day, Stephanie showed up, confronted Sherri, and Stephanie said, quote, "If I can't have John, no one else will," end quote.
Oh,
And then she
sounds like
walked
a
out.
threat to me.
That's threatening. That's super threatening. Don't you think that's threatening? I think it's threatening. So, despite all of the craziness happening with Stephanie just kind of like popping up like a daisy in their lives every so often, they got married. Woohoo! In November of 1985, Sherri and John officially tied the knot. I guess I should be happy for them.
Nah, no, not
But
happy.
I just know that John is just John, and that's just not great. So, what should have been like a really happy time for Sherri was overshadowed by Stephanie's looming presence that she seemed to just not want to go away. And Sherri told her father not very long after they were married that she believed that Stephanie was stalking her, following her.
Oh, gross.
But what was she gonna do? John kept telling her, no big
No biggie.
deal, babe.
She means nothing to me. We
Just
never even
ignore
had
it.
anything together. We were just nothing.
Exactly. And I can only assume what Sherri was feeling at this moment, but if I was in her shoes, I would have felt pretty helpless by the fact that Stephanie was a cop. Even if she was
Yeah.
making me very uncomfortable, who am I going to tell?
Yeah.
The LAPD?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she works for the LAPD. Like, what are they going to do? They're not going to just like turn on one of their own just because I feel uncomfortable by her following me around. Like, what good is that going to do?
Yep.
So, add on top of that the fact that her husband was telling her to just ignore it. Ignore that gut feeling you're getting that something's wrong. Just ignore that. Make that go away. No big deal. So
Whatever.
Sherri ignored it, and life went on for a little bit. But on February 24th of 1986, 3 months after they'd been married, it was just a regular day for them. John left early in the morning to go to work, and Sherri was scheduled to give a motivational speech at work, but she actually didn't want to do it because she didn't like it as a managerial tactic. She thought it was a waste of time. And so she told John that she was thinking about calling in sick that day to avoid giving the speech.
Oh no. She should have
So
done it.
John, she really, really should have. John tried to call Sherri around 10 a.m., but he didn't get an answer. And he actually called a couple more times throughout the day, and again, he didn't get any responses. And so when he got home from work that day around 5:55, it was a little weird that he hadn't heard from Sherri all day. He found the garage door open. Sherri's black BMW was missing from the garage, and there was broken glass on the driveway.
Oh.
And he was like, that's not good. That's not good at all.
Yeah, obviously.
Sherri hadn't mentioned going anywhere that evening, and like with broken glass and stuff on the driveway, I'd be like, something bad happened. That's just horrible. People don't just leave broken glass on the ground on their driveway. It's just not a thing. So he immediately runs inside, and he said that he knew something was wrong, and he found something really bad. Inside on the living room floor, John found Sherri lying in a pool of blood. And he immediately called police, and the LAPD arrived on the scene and began piecing together what they thought happened. And oh, the good old LAPD. They're just so great. They have a fabulous reputation, as we all know. Anyways, the main detective assigned to the case was a man named Lyle Mayer, and he started going through everything at the scene. The living room was a mess, almost like it had been ransacked, and there was toppled furniture and broken glass everywhere. And the evidence wasn't exclusively in the living room. There also appeared to have been a struggle that took place upstairs. They found a bloody handprint on the wall upstairs and a trail of blood leading down the stairs towards the front door. They also found that Sherri had extensive defensive wounds. It looked like she had marks, like someone had tried to bind her. She had a bruise on her face that looked like it had been made with the muzzle of a gun, and she had a deep bite mark on her arm.
Ew.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Stephanie,
Yes.
you are disgusting.
Oh, Sherri was found wearing a nightgown and a bathrobe, so they assumed that she'd been surprised and hadn't been expecting company. So their initial running theory was that Sherri's murder was due to a burglary gone wrong.
And
They
they
believed
bit
that
her?
apparently in the struggle.
In the
They
struggle, it
believed
was just like, let me take a bite out of her. It's a good move.
totally normal.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, they believed that one, maybe two intruders had come into the house and started ransacking the place, and that one of them went upstairs to go, steal whatever was up there, and they found Sherri alone. And they confronted her with the gun and shot her once in the chest while she was upstairs. And when the second intruder heard the shot, they ran out of the house. And then at this point, Sherri stumbled down the stairs towards the front door, which explains the blood trail they found leading from upstairs to the front door. And she was either trying to escape or push the panic button on the alarm or something, and was caught by the remaining intruder. And she was then attacked in the living room with. They found a porcelain vase which had been broken, and they assumed it had been used to hit her in the head to incapacitate her. And while she was down from the blow, the attacker grabbed the gun, used a quilt as a silencer, like wrapped it around the gun, and then shot her twice more in the chest, ultimately killing her. So that was
Oh my
police's
gosh, that's
running theory
brutal.
of the scene. It is brutal. And Sherri fought hard, which is why they think she got the bite mark. They think they were grappling for the gun or something, and the attacker like bit her arm to try and get her to let go or something. That's what they thought.
I guess that makes
So
sense.
I could see that.
Go Sherri,
Um,
way to put up a fight.
yeah,
See, it seems in character for her.
yeah, it really does. And 8 hours after Sherri was found, at about 2 a.m. the following morning, a criminalist from the LA County Coroner's Office finally made his way to the scene. So it took 8 hours. His name was Lloyd Mahaney, and the reason he was late getting to the scene was because he'd actually been at another homicide scene that night. Somebody else had been murdered, and so he didn't get to Sherri's crime scene until like 8 hours later. And he began examining her body and checking for trace evidence like hair or fibers or anything that seemed off, different, of note, whatever. And later autopsy would reveal that the bullets had hit her heart, lungs, and spine. So that's a real bummer. She died pretty brutally.
Would
And
that have been like, and you might not know this, but in that case, isn't that a pretty instant death?
I think so, yeah. I mean, the first shot they do believe was earlier than the last two that she
Yeah,
sustained. So
right.
I feel like, I don't know. I feel like when you get shot directly in the heart, you bleed out pretty fast. So I have no idea, honestly.
Hmm.
She's
Okay,
she's survived long enough to fight still. So the
right.
first shot couldn't have been that deadly, you know? I don't know. At least not like an immediate death. But yeah, I didn't really see anything about what her actual like cause of death was. Like obviously it was the gunshot wounds, but like what like actually caused her to bleed out and die. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, so Lloyd Mahaney also did a sexual assault kit and collected swabs and things like that in case there was any sort of sexual assault on her, and he also found the bite mark on her arm and he took swabs from that as well because he wanted to get all the evidence he could. And once he'd collected all the evidence and done an examination of the body, he took all of the evidence back to the coroner's office and logged it at 10:32 a.m. on February 25th, 1986. And police continued the investigation. They canvassed the area and they found some odd things on the day of Sherri's death. At 9:45 a.m., one of the neighbors noticed that the Ruetten's garage door was open and Sherri's BMW was gone. So
Okay.
that sort of indicates like the crime because they believed that the intruder had stolen her car like to get away, to escape.
Yeah,
So
that's kind of
like
what it seems like.
yeah. So it seems like whatever happened had to have happened before 9:45 a.m. when this neighbor saw that the garage was open and the car wasn't there. But there was a maid who was cleaning a nearby townhome, and she heard two people fighting coming from the Ruetten home, and she heard something falling around 2:30 p.m. So
Okay.
that's like hours later.
Yeah.
It seems weird. I don't know. They couldn't really time this. They didn't know when it happened. And the maid, she didn't hear any gunshots or anything. She just heard this fighting. And she thought it was just like a domestic dispute. People were just yelling at each other, so she didn't call the police.
Hmm.
I just want to put this out there. Just call them. Just call the police.
Well, even
I
if it's a
mean,
domestic dispute.
yeah. Like, even if they're just screaming at each other, if you feel like somebody could be, like, hurt in any way, just call the police.
Just do it.
They don't have to know it was you. It can be anonymous.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. So, anyways, the day after the murder, Sherri's parents, who lived in Arizona, they came to LA, and her father, Nels, reached out to the detective, Mayer, whatever his name is, and they kind of updated him on the theory, and they told Nels that they thought it was multiple burglars responsible for their daughter's death. And they also told Nels that they'd ruled John out as a suspect. They didn't believe he had anything to do with it. And in return, Nels told the detectives that his daughter had been complaining about one of John's ex-girlfriends who'd been harassing her.
Thank you.
And Nels didn't know the woman's name, but he knew that she was an LA police officer.
Oh.
And Nels was like, she's a pretty good suspect. She's been scaring my daughter. And Mayer put it in the file, and it was never followed up on.
Of course.
Not ever. A week later, the BMW was found abandoned, but they didn't find any evidence in it. And then 2 months after Sherri's murder, 2 men tried to rob a condo a few blocks from Sherri's townhouse where she'd been killed. And these detectives immediately were like, oh, this is similar to what we think happened. We think it's these 2 guys. They had a gun on them, and they were robbing people from the same area. And so the entire focus of Sherri's investigation became centered around these 2 burglars. And they were unidentified. Nobody knew who they were. And they were in the wind because they did not get caught while they were trying.
In the wind.
Into the wind. And basically, they went months without making any progress on figuring out who these 2 random burglars were. They only had a very a vague description that they were 2 Latino men who were short, around 5'4" or 5'6".
Okay.
Yeah, that was what they had to go on.
Awesome. So anybody. Literally anybody. So by late October, which is like 7 months later, the Rasmussens, they were offering a $10,000 reward for any information on like suspects for their daughter's case. And nothing came of it. There was just nothing. And just like a little aside here so that we can kind of understand some context about the LA area at this time. In 1986, there were 831 people murdered in the LA area. That's a lot of people. How many is that a month? That's like 2 a day?
Yeah, it's like 2 people
plus?
every day. That's 2.5 people a day. So more than 2 people a day. That's crazy, is what that is. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot for one singular police department to have to. It's not one singular, but you know what I mean. That's a lot for police to try and like solve.
I mean, 2 a day, yeah, that's impossible.
Yeah, no.
You're not going to solve 2 murders a day.
Well, and they didn't, but
how many of those are like, I mean, not that you're going to know this, but the question is posed, how many of those are gang related though?
Probably a lot of them. And
because like, that's LA. Yeah, I got that.
There are a lot of murders that aren't hard to solve. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
they're pretty straight up.
Like their domestic disturbances gone wrong, or like you catch the person in the act, or you know, there's just lots of stuff like that, and there's lots of gang violence and things like that. And so they actually had a 65% clearance rate in 1986 of the 831 people murdered. They solved 538 of those murders.
That's pretty good. I'll give it to them.
So it could be worse. 463 of those were actually because they caught the bad guy. So I'm gonna revise that. They actually solved 463 murders. 75 of the cases that they said were quote unquote solved were actually cases that they labeled cleared/other. Because
Okay.
that basically just means police think they know who did it. It's pretty obvious who did it, but they can't catch that person or put that person in jail because they're dead or they never caught them or blah 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 blah. That makes sense.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Well, still
yeah,
okay. I mean, it's 50% that they
we're
put
doing
away.
okay.
Okay, that's pretty bad, but I was trying to be
We're doing
kind
okay.
because that's a hard job. Whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is a hard job.
That's
So,
still like capturing a murderer once a day.
yeah,
I
I feel
mean,
like
okay,
that's
so that's still pretty good.
when you think about it in that way,
But also, how
you're
many like
doing all right.
precincts do you have going?
That's true. I
Sorry.
don't know.
I don't know. I don't know the numbers on that, but whatever.
I don't either.
We'll give them
I
the
don't
benefit
either.
of the doubt. They're dealing with a lot.
I
Okay.
don't either. Yeah, they are. And so, basically what happened was on December 31st of 1986, Sherri Rasmussen's
Mm-hmm.
on December 31st, 1986, Sherri Rasmussen's murder was labeled as one of the 293 unsolved cases from 1986, and it was shelved, basically.
Right, because they went into all the leads. They looked into every possible option.
They looked into
So
everything.
clearly, it is unsolvable.
Totally not able to be solved.
You know what pisses me off about this though? Is it's like freaking Stephanie, she's like, I'm just a popo. No, ain't nobody gonna catch me. Hee hee hee. She was right.
Ha ha ha. She was
That's what
freaking
pisses
right.
me off.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it would seem like all hope was lost, no? But halfway across the world, in England,
What?
DNA was being used for
Oh,
the first time to solve murder.
I'm just like,
That was a really
where's
bad
this
segue.
going?
I was like, England? What's happening? Yeah, so 7 months after Sherri's death, DNA was used for the first time ever in a criminal investigation to solve a murder.
Oh.
And this was 1987. So we're going to cover this case some point because it's actually a pretty famous case in England. Suffice it to say, basically, that the same year that Sherri was murdered, DNA was starting to enter the crime-solving landscape. But it didn't really apply to Sherri yet because her case had been all but forgotten. Technology was making giant leaps, and for years, her parents, Nels and Loretta, did everything they could to keep their daughter's case in the public view so that it would get police attention, and it just wasn't working. And in November of 1987, they did a press conference with John, Sherri's husband, and they again offered $10,000 as a reward, and no information came from that. So they're getting pretty desperate. At this point, in 1988, 2 years later, Sherri's father wrote a letter to the chief of police, Daryl Gates, and asked him to intervene and get this case looked at and make sure that they looked at John's ex-girlfriend, Stephanie. Please, he said, look into this case and look at this suspect. And he never received a reply to that letter. Nels also mentioned to other detectives that were like kind of still in charge of the case, and they told him he watched too much TV.
Oh.
So
Really? Okay.
they're getting a lot of cooperation from the LAPD.
Awesome.
Great. In the early 90s, so we're now 4+ years after Sherri's death, Loretta, Sherri's mom, was consistently, regularly calling the homicide unit to get updates on the case. 1993, the Rasmussens actually traveled back to LA for an in-person meeting to get an update on the case. And the detective who was in charge of the case, it had been handed off to him, basically.
Right.
And he'd
Okay.
gone through it, and he said there just weren't any leads or enough evidence for him to do anything, and they couldn't make any progress.
And
And
they
then
said,
Nell,
"What about the freaking one that I'm telling you right now, you little loser?"
yep.
I hope in those
And
exact
then
words.
I hope that's exactly what he said. But I don't think he did, because he was still trying to get them to solve his daughter's murder. So Nels brought up an article he'd read about DNA forensics being used as evidence in criminal cases, because now it's the early 90s. That's more of a thing now.
Booyah.
Um, and Nels even offered to pay to get the DNA analyzed, because this wasn't like part of the police structure, right? They didn't really do that back then. And so Nels was like, I will pay for it. I will pay to get the DNA from from my daughter's case analyzed. And the detective told him no. And then he told him, you need to move on with your lives, basically.
Oh, I'm
So,
sorry. There's a lead sitting right in front of you, and something
literally.
else you can do to look into this case. No, sir, I will not move on with my life.
Yeah. No,
Go through the dang thing and do it the right way.
exactly. At this point,
Oh, I would be
Loretta
livid.
stopped calling to get updates, because obviously the police were not going to do anything to solve her daughter's murder. So, it honestly seemed like the world had given up on Sherri. But there was still lots of evidence sitting in a freezer in the
Yeah.
LA County Coroner's office. And it was alongside similar evidence from hundreds of other murders that were unsolved. And they was just waiting around to be tested, basically. And while Sherri's case sat cold on a shelf, there was a detective named David Lambkin. And he was a huge proponent of using technology to solve murders. It was like his whole career was focused around that.
Come on, David, come through for us. Let's do this.
David's gonna come through in a way. He'd been working cases where fingerprint and ballistic databases had been used to kind of break cases open and solve them. And he was really eager to see what other advances in technology could be used to solve old cases, basically. And around this time in 1998, the FBI launched CODIS. You know, the one you hear
Mhm.
about on TV all the time.
Okay.
The
Yep.
DNA database. And that was 1998 was when that happened. That seems like crazy, but
Yeah, that is
anyways.
crazy. That's wild.
In 2000, the LA County got a $50 million state grant to do DNA testing for unsolved murders. And David
Dang.
Lambkin was like, that's my bag. I got this. And he teamed up with Lisa Kahn from the DA's office, and they proposed basically a cold case unit. They were like, let's get 7 detectives together. We'll make 3 teams of 2, and Lambkin will lead the way, and we're going to go through all these cases and determine which ones have the best chance of being solved by getting DNA analysis done on them. So, that's what they did. They made a little cold case unit, and they had literally thousands of cases to go through at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. They would.
They went through 39 years worth of cold cases, which was 7,745 cold
Oh my
murders.
gosh.
Yeah, and they had to go through each case and determine whether or not it was going to be able to be solved potentially with DNA. And they basically made a pile. Not DNA solvable, and then DNA solvable. And they just
Gee.
sorted through all of them. And it took them months to sort through all of them. And eventually, in 2003, they made their way to Sherri Rasmussen's case. And they sent a
Hallelujah.
request to the LAPD crime lab to get the DNA for the case analyzed. And guess what happened? Nothing happened. The
What?
request was not seen. No action was taken for over a year on that
What
request.
is happening? There
Just
is
a
somebody
nightmare.
working against this. What in the world?
What? That's a really good question. Who done it? In December of 2004, so over like a year and 3 months later, there's a criminalist named Jennifer Butterworth, and I like Jennifer Butterworth. She's fantastic. She noticed that Sherri's case was sitting on her colleague's desk, and the request had been unfulfilled. And she
Thank
was
you.
like, "Are you gonna do that?" And the guy was like, "Oh, I'll get around to it." And Jennifer Butterworth was like, "I'm just gonna do it. I volunteer. I'll just get it done." And so she started going through it.
Go Jennifer.
She went through the. I know, Jennifer
What a
Butterworth
relief.
for the
Ugh.
win. So she went through all of the biological evidence. She got Sherri's DNA profile from a blood sample that was taken, and she compared it to a fingernail that they'd found at the scene and a bloodstained towel they'd taken from the scene, and she only found Sherri's DNA. So then she moved on and she looked at the swabs that were taken from the bite mark
Okay.
and from the rape kit, and just another little minor bump. For about a week after she started looking into this, she could not find the swabs for the bite mark or for the rape kit. She had no idea where they were.
These people are just incompetent. That's ridiculous.
And to be fair, it's been like 20 years now, ish. So I guess things can get lost. That's a long time for
I
something to sit in
guess.
a freezer. But
Whatever.
eventually she found it. She found the little envelope that they'd put the swab samples in. And she said that it was ratty and pretty beaten up, and that the envelope was actually torn on the corner, but that the samples were intact. Like, thankfully, nothing had happened to the samples. So she was
Okay.
able to test the swab from the bite mark, and she got not one, but 2 DNA profiles. One was Sherri's, and the other was unknown. She
Oh,
believed to be the
the
killer.
killer. Right.
The killer. So Jennifer ran this DNA profile through CODIS, and nothing came back. But there was one other interesting thing that caught Jennifer Butterworth's eye. And it was that the second DNA profile, the DNA profile of the killer, was female.
Hmm.
Not a Mexican
Interesting.
man, but a woman. And so she wrote up a report on what she'd found, and she sent it back up to the cold case unit for them to investigate. And unfortunately, due to some inconvenient timing, the cold case unit was swamped because there had been a law passed that all prisoners who were felons or had committed sex crimes had to submit a DNA sample to be uploaded to CODIS. And so
They were dealing with that
they were
madness.
dealing with that because now they had more hits coming off CODIS for all these murders, and they were solving like a bunch of cases at a time. And they looked at Sherri's case, but there wasn't enough there to immediately arrest anybody. They would still have to do like a more thorough investigation. And so they set her case aside while they were dealing
Again.
with cases that, yes, could be solved more easily. And it's just so frustrating. So frustrating. Anyways, so fast forward to 2009 now. And Lampkin has now retired from his cold case unit. But the unit was still going strong, and there were 3 detectives, Pete Barba, Mark Martinez, and Jem Newtall. And they were looking for a new cold case to solve, and they found Sherri's. And I'm just going to tell you right now, they actually investigate.
Oh,
Like, it's not going to get
thank
shelved
goodness.
again. So, they read the DNA analysis report from 2005. So, Jennifer Butterworth and her whole hero story was 4 years ago at this
Gee.
point. So, and they saw, like, when they were reading the DNA analysis report that a woman was most likely the killer. And they were like, that's weird. Not super common. And on top of that, it's definitely weird that the main suspects in this case were two Mexican men. And now the DNA of the killer is most likely a woman. So they were like, we need to start from scratch on this investigation. So they started from the beginning. They reinvestigated with the assumption that they were looking for a woman and not two men. And they had a list of 5 names after they kind of reinvestigated. And one of the names on that list was Stephanie Lazarus, John's ex. They quickly found out that Stephanie was a police officer. And so it was a little hard for them to believe that she was a police officer and also a murderer. But they still kept her name on the list. They just put her as the 5th suspect, the least likely to have committed the murder.
Eye roll.
I know.
Come on.
I have to give it to these detectives. They agreed to do 2 things when it came to this case. The first was that they would maintain complete secrecy about the investigation, meaning they wouldn't write or speak Stephanie Lazarus's name anywhere that it could be seen or heard, because they literally worked in the same building as her. So they didn't want anybody to know that she was potentially a suspect or a person of interest in this murder investigation. First of all, they didn't want to ruin her reputation if she was innocent. And in the unlikely event that she was the killer, they didn't want to tip her off that they knew that she was involved in this case. So they were just keeping it on the DL. And the second thing that all the detectives agreed to, they promised that they would follow the evidence of the case no matter where it ended up leading. So even if Stephanie ended up being guilty, they were going to investigate it and do it right. And if she was the killer, then she was the killer. And they believed that what had happened to Sherri wasn't a random act of violence like the initial detectives believed at the time. They believed that whoever had done this to Sherri knew her. And so they knew that somebody on their list of 5 suspects was responsible for Sherri's death. And so it didn't take long for the detectives to kind of narrow the list down. They pretty quickly took 3 names off the list, leaving only 2 names, Stephanie Lazarus and one other person, a nurse that Sherri had worked with at the time. And that nurse had been seen arguing with Sherri occasionally at the hospital. They didn't get along very well. And so they started with the nurse, and they got a DNA sample from her, and they compared it to the DNA profile from this unknown female killer in Sherri's case.
I'm so glad that Stephanie's the very last option here. Super duper awesome.
It's not like her parents. It's not like her parents have been telling police for decades at this point to look at this person.
Did they not contact her parents again and be like, your daughter's case has been reopened?
They do, but they don't yet. But they do once they have more to go on. They didn't want to give them false hope about it being solved.
I guess that makes sense.
So that means the only name on the list now is Stephanie Lazarus. That's their only suspect. And they fully believe that it has to be her. They're hoping it's not. It's always possible that it's not. They don't have any evidence that it's her at this point, but it seems like it is. So they dove headfirst into the case, into Stephanie Lazarus, and this is what they found. At the time that Sherri was killed, Stephanie Lazarus was 26 years old, and she was a patrol officer. So she was bottom of the totem pole when it comes to the hierarchy of the police. And in 1993, she made detective, and then in 1996, she married a fellow LAPD officer, and they adopted a little girl.
Sorry.
Yep.
Eek.
Yep.
No.
Yeah. In 2006, Lazarus was assigned to the art theft detail, which was like a really prestigious position in the force because it was like, I guess, fancier or something. I don't know. But she had a long career in police work, and she had never once, not ever, been involved in any sort of misconduct or use of force incident while she was a police officer. Not one time.
This
had a stellar track
woman
record.
murdered somebody and then just continued to live a life as if there was nothing wrong
As if
with her.
nothing happened. As if
She
she never did a
adopted some
single
kid
thing.
and gave them, I don't know, it a home.
Her, it was a girl.
I assumed that for some reason, but
It.
anyway. Okay, that was a stretch, but like a little girl at home, and now she has taken that away from her again. That's heartbreaking. In a
Yeah,
completely
it's
different
horrible.
way.
It's
Okay.
horrible. So, despite her wonderful non-violent police record, there were just some things that were just weird. Back in the mid-'80s when Sherri was murdered, most police officers carried a 38 caliber pistol as their off-duty or backup gun, basically.
Let me
And
guess. That's
that
the
was,
freaking
yep,
murder weapon.
you got it. That's
Mm.
the same caliber of gun that killed Sherri. And weirdly enough, 13 days after Sherri's murder, Stephanie Lazarus had reported her 38 gun stolen. Somebody
Oh,
had taken it.
so convenient.
The report about the stolen gun said that Lazarus had walked into the Santa Monica Police Department 13 days after Sherri's death, and that she had identified herself as an LAPD officer, and that she told them her car had been parked at the Santa Monica Pier and it had been broken into, and the lock
Oh
on
my
the
gosh.
driver's side door had been punched in. That's her words. I don't know
Punched
how you
in.
punch in
Yeah.
a lock.
Okay.
And a blue gym bag had been stolen.
Oh my
And
gosh.
inside that gym bag, there were clothes, cassette tapes, and a .38 revolver.
Wow. Terrible. Wonder where that went.
Imagine. So detectives, they read this report. They got their hands on this stolen gun report from the 80s. And they realized that they were never going to have a murder weapon because Sherri had obviously
She got rid of it.
got rid of it. So at this point, detectives brought in Sherri's parents to re-question them about things. And Nels, Sherri's father, was more than willing to tell them everything he could think of about this. And he included the story about John's cop ex-girlfriend who had frightened his daughter before she died. So, on May 19th, 2009, a surveillance unit was directed to follow Stephanie Lazarus. They'd been preparing for a week for this, and they were being directly supervised by the chief of police. And these detectives, man, they were not going to risk anything going wrong because they wanted this done by the books. Because this was a police officer, so they wanted to make sure they did it the right way. And if Stephanie was the killer, they wanted to make sure that, like, there hadn't been any corners cut so that she wouldn't have a way out, basically. And this surveillance team, plainclothes officers, followed Stephanie around while she walked doing errands all day. And they were just waiting for her to leave some sort of DNA evidence behind that they could pick up, basically.
Oh, I was like, what are they waiting for? I'm so confused.
Yeah. So eventually, she threw out a cup and a straw that she'd been drinking from, and the surveillance team, like, booked it over to the trash can and took the cup out of the trash can. And they took it back to the lab, and they got a DNA profile from the saliva sample they found in the straw. And that DNA profile was compared to the one that they found in the bite mark on Sherri's body. And it took a while, but 10 days after they found this cup, Detective Bub got a call from the crime lab. Yeah, Detective Bub.
Detective Bub?
B-U-B, Bub.
Sorry.
It's a really great name.
Alrighty.
Like, I really like it. Anyways, he got a call from the crime lab, and it was confirmed that it was a match. Stephanie's DNA was found in that bite mark. At this point, the case was handed over to the robbery homicide unit. And that was tricky because they literally shared a floor with Lazarus's team, her department.
Oh.
So a lot of these guys knew her, worked with her, were friends with her. And in the end, they picked 2 detectives from the robbery homicide unit that really didn't know her that well to question her. because they wanted it to be as unbiased as possible. And at this point, like, this was not a common, like, this was kept between the cold case unit and the chief of police and, like, these two detectives from the robbery homicide unit. Nobody else knew what was going on because they didn't want gossip and stuff getting back to
Well,
Stephanie about
yeah,
what was
and
going on.
tampering.
Exactly. Because she has access to everything. So if she
Yeah.
finds out, she could just ruin everything. So they were trying to figure out how to approach her because they didn't want to confront her when she had a gun on her because she might just go crazy. And what they ended up doing was kind of sneaky. They faked having to do an interview at Parker Center's jail division, which is basically like a holding cell area. And it was located like a floor below the robbery, homicide, and art theft department floor. So it was just like one floor down. And they weren't allowed to have guns on the jail floor because, you know, prisoners shouldn't have guns in the room with them. So it wouldn't have been weird for her to like have to give her gun up before going into the interrogation room to talk to this fake interviewee. So they told her, "Hey, we need your help. There's kind of like an art sort of thing going on.
We
Can
need
you
your
help us
help.
interview this guy?" So they all walk down to the jail, two detectives and her, and they sit down in the interrogation room after they give up their guns. And as soon as they're in this room, the room has recording and video equipment running. They just start like casually, you know, cop to cop, chatting with her about a case that they're working. They're like, "We just got this kind of old case and we're just looking into it. Your name kind of came up. Can you tell us anything about it?" And they were like, "Do you remember John Ruetten? Like, your name was written down in a case because he's involved in the case we're investigating." And she was like, "Oh yeah, I think I remember John Ruetten. He I think we dated a little bit." She's like, "Yeah."
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
And she's
vaguely
like,
familiar.
and he's like, "Oh cool. Like, were you guys like dating or like what was going on? Um, what was your relationship like?" And she was like, "I mean, yeah, we dated a little bit." And she's like, "What's going on? What's
Do
this
I need a
about?"
lawyer?
Basically. And then they kind of sort of dropped the facade a little bit, if you will. And they just started asking her questions like about how she knew them and well, all the stuff. And whatever, and she's just kind of like they were purposefully like unclear about whether they were questioning her as a witness or as a suspect. They wanted to keep her guessing because they wanted her to answer their questions. And so they're just kind of talking to her about things and talking about like random stuff to do with the case. And then finally she's starting to get like a little bit fed up and she's like, "Seriously, what's going on?" And they're like, "Would you be willing to submit a DNA sample?"
For
And she
testing,
was
even though
for
we don't
just to
need it
test.
anymore.
And she was like, "No, I want a lawyer." And then she stood up and walked out of the interrogation room. And she didn't get very far because at the end of the hallway, two officers were waiting for her and they arrested her promptly. And they said, "We don't actually need your DNA sample. We already had it. And you murdered Sherri Rasmussen." And they arrested her for Sherri's murder. It
Yes.
finally happened 23 years later. Oh, goodness. So,
Gee.
she was taken to the LA County Jail and was held on $10 million bail. So that's good. She doesn't have $10 million, that's for sure. And her trial got lots of media attention because it was an LAPD police officer on trial. And prosecutors, their main focus, they argued that Stephanie was jealous of Sherri and that she wanted John for herself and wanted Sherri out of the way. And in the trial, his opening statement, Shannon Presby was his name. the prosecutor. He summed up the case and he said, "A bite, a bullet, a gun, barrel, and a broken heart. That's the evidence that will prove to you that the defendant, Stephanie Lazarus, murdered Sherri Rasmussen." End quote.
Dang.
So,
Drop the mic.
drop the mic, Mr. Prosecutor guy. And John Ruetten testified against Stephanie at this trial, and he talked about their relationship and about how he'd slept with her when he'd been engaged to Sherri, and that it had been a huge mistake. I guess hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, ain't it? Yeah.
What a little too late there, buddy, but not your fault. But man, if you'd been a little nicer to Stephanie, maybe this could have been avoided. All right. And then the defense, Mr. Overland was the defense attorney. He pushed the original theory. That was his defense. That it had been a burglary, and he based most of his argument on the original investigation that had been done in 1986. So he tried to discredit the DNA from the bite mark, because that was like the main focus of the prosecutor's case. And he focused on character witnesses that said Lazarus, like, didn't really care that much about John at the time, and that she was a really good lady. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure
No.
how much of a defense that is against DNA evidence, but hey, he tried. So the jury deliberated for a few days and then convicted Stephanie Lazarus of first-degree murder. So, woohoo.
Yeah, pretty hard to deny. There's some pretty solid evidence there.
Pretty solid. You literally bit
You
her.
bit her like a dummy.
So, I get the DNA wasn't a thing back then, but like, dang. That was just not cool. That was dumb. In 2010, so this is a year later, Sherri's family filed a civil suit against the LAPD and the city of Los Angeles.
Yeah, dang
which I
straight.
feel like they were totally justified. They claimed that a cover-up happened, basically, to prevent their daughter's case from being solved.
Yeah, because it basically did.
And
They told them who the murderer was.
It was written down in the case file. It literally said, I think, Stephanie Lazarus, and then next to it said P.O. as in police officer.
Mm-hmm.
So she was there. She was in there. And they also talked about the fact that Stephanie had been allowed to look at the case file over the years. She would check in on it to see if progress was being made on the case. And that just no big deal.
Okay. Excuse me?
And they also said that the LAPD had been hostile and uncooperative from the beginning, and that they literally wouldn't look into Stephanie when they'd been directed there multiple times. So that was like what their case was all about, was basically this whole, they dropped the ball. That's what they're saying. They dropped the ball in this case. And they didn't win their suit because of a loophole, basically. This was like, some of the things in their suit were federal, and so it moved up the chain and it got denied. And the state didn't have to be held accountable for it. And then they tried again to file the suit like a year later, and the city told them that the statute of limitations for them to resubmit the suit was over and they wouldn't be able to resubmit.
Oh my gosh.
So, way to go, Los Angeles.
Yeah, you did them real dirty. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Meanwhile, Stephanie Lazarus, she tried to appeal her conviction, but her conviction was upheld. And then in November of 2023, so last year, she served 13 years of her sentence, and she was up for her first parole hearing. So she, in this parole hearing, admitted to the murder. And said, quote, "It makes me sick to this day that I took an oath to protect and serve people, and I took Sherri Rasmussen's life from her." End quote. And the board then recommended that she get parole. And they ordered a hearing to reconsider the evidence against her.
Are you shiding me?
Yes. That really happened.
That is ridiculous.
They were like,
told
yes.
you that she murdered somebody, that she got away with it for nigh of 25 years. She's only been in there 13 years for
Not even as many
murdering
years as
somebody
she.
in cold blood
Yeah.
because she got pissed.
Yep.
And then they're like, yeah, we should probably just let her out. She's a good
Yep.
cop. Shut
Yep.
the front door.
Yeah. And at the hearing, there were lots of people who supported Stephanie Lazarus, including former inmates who'd served time with her. They talked about how young she'd been when she committed the murder, that it was a youthful error.
No, 26 is not young. I
No, it's not.
myself am a year shy of 26, and I am
I'm
old enough to know
accountable.
that murder is wrong. Thank
Yep,
you anyway.
These people also talked about how great her behavior had been in prison and how she'd been helping women rebuild their lives and get ready to join the world as rehabilitated individuals. Yeah, so lots of people had lots of good things to say, I guess. But on the other hand, the board also heard from John Ruetten and some of Sherri's relatives. And they talked about the pain this crime had caused them and pointed out that Sherri was murdered not out of an act of impulsivity by a young woman in love with John, but that she'd been calculating and had planned and executed the murder of a woman she was jealous of, and that she'd covered it up for more than 20 years, during which at any point she could have come forward and confessed if she felt true remorse. And she'd used her training and experience as a police officer to get away with it.
Yeah,
And that is
exactly.
not congruent with somebody who actually feels remorse for something they did. So, Detective Stearns, one of the detectives that worked the case, said, quote, "Those are not the hallmarks of youthful offense. They are the hallmarks of criminal sophistication and maturity." End quote. So, John told the board that her confession of regret that she'd given at her first parole hearing was bogus, and that she'd only done it in order to gain favor with the board so she could get parole. And he didn't believe that she felt guilty at all. So that was his take on that, and I agree with it, even though I don't like him.
Yeah.
In October of this year, so just like this month, basically, like last month,
Whoa.
they decided that her parole was rescinded and she would remain in jail.
Good.
Woohoo!
What was her original sentence?
I couldn't find it, but I didn't look that hard, so it's probably out there somewhere. But it doesn't seem like it was that much because she was able to get a parole hearing after 13 years. That was one thing I didn't look very hard for.
She was sentenced to 25 years to life and an additional 2 years for the use of a firearm.
25 years to life.
According to a quick Google search.
Still, I guess parole is offered for good behavior earlier than that, but that's a bummer. So.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that there was. Yeah. Glad there was eventual justice dealt, because that case drove me about nuts.
Seriously. So I'm just gonna end with some things that Sherri's friends and family said about her. Because Sherri seems like a really cool lady, and the story is really about her. So her sister described her saying, quote, "She was a clown. If everything got too serious, she would make everyone laugh." End quote.
Aww.
And then another sister said, quote, "Sherri was all about family. Sherri was our glue. She kept us all together." End quote. So her family really loved her, and I'm glad that they got some justice eventually, 23 years later. But honestly, this case never would have been solved without DNA, so I'm glad that technology is what it is. So, yeah. That is the roller coaster story of Sherri Rasmussen and her eventual murder being solved. There you have it.
Amazing. I'm glad it got there. Well, stay frosty, y'all.
Yeah.
See you next week.